So in this video, I'm going to be doing a couple problems from review number 1 about simplifying imaginary numbers, complex numbers, roots with negatives. So we're going to do 13, 15, 28, and 31. That's what was requested. Okay, so this first one is multiplying radicals with negatives. And I know I can't just multiply them together because that product property isn't true unless they're both positive. So the first thing that needs to be done is dealing with the I. This is the same thing as I root 2 times I root 98. Because the square root of negative 2 is the same as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 2. This is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 98. And these square roots of negative 1s become I. So now we're going to continue on. I times I is I squared. And root 2 times root 98 is root 196, which happens to be a perfect square. So now that I'm thinking about simplifying that, I don't have to pull out the largest perfect square. I just know that that's 14 squared. So I squared is negative 1. The square root of 196 is 14. So my answer is negative 14. If you tried to simplify first, you could have done that, like I root 2 times I times 7 times root 2, and then the root 2 times the root 2 would just be a 2. And you would end up with the same thing of negative 14, either way, whether you took a different path. Okay, so now I'm going to do the next one, which is 4 times the square root of negative 8 times the square root of negative 1. So I'm going to rewrite the square root of negative 8 as I root 8, because it's root negative 1, root 8, so I. And then the square root of negative 1 is just I. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply the i's together. I times I is I squared. And I know, and this is for always, I squared is negative 1. So this is the same thing as 4 times negative 1, which is negative 4. And I can't leave my answer like this because root 8 can be simplified to root 4 root 2, so it's 2 root 2. So I have negative 4 times 2 root 2, so my answer is negative 8 root 2. So you just have to make sure with the negatives you don't multiply first, that you deal with this and you make it i's. Different strategy. So I times I is I squared, that's where that negative 1 comes from, and that's why you have that negative in your answer. If there was a negative on the outside to begin with, it would end up becoming positive, but there wasn't. Alright, next one. So this is like a 2-term thing times a 2-term thing. So you need to make sure to distribute. So I have negative 2 times 3. Oops, I want a pen. Negative 2 times 3, negative 6. Negative 2 times negative I is a positive 2i. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6i. And this is the important one. Negative 2i times negative I is a positive 2i to the second power. I times I. I see people mess that one up a lot. Alright, so now I have to simplify. I have like terms here. 2i minus 6i is a negative 4i. And then plus 2i squared. Make sure not to leave I squared anymore, because I know that it's negative 1. So I can combine negative 6 and negative 2 to get negative 8 minus 4i. And make sure your answer is always in the standard form of a plus bi. So it's the real number first, and then plus or minus the imaginary number. That's how you get that complex number. Okay, last one from review 1. It's a similar problem. So probably if you made any mistakes on 28, you made the same mistakes on 31, I would predict. 6 times 1 is 6, minus 6i, plus 2i, and our last one's 2i times negative I is minus 2i squared. I times I is I squared. Alright, something times itself is to the second power. So now I can combine like terms. Wow, this one's very similar. Six. And then these two together is minus 4i. Minus 2, I squared is negative 1. So I have 6 plus 2, because it's minus a negative. So that's 8. Oh, wow, what a similar answer. And it's in the form a plus bi. So make sure you're writing in that form. Okay, so those are 4 problems from the first review, and I'm going to make a separate video for requests from the second review.